Chapter 2. A synopsis of Egypt's history during the Empire. Between 1567 and 1085 BC. The 18th through 20th dynasties are included in the New Kingdom. It is also known as the Egyptian Empire era and lasted for about 5 centuries. 18th Dynasty. Spanning from 1567 to 1320 BC. The motivation behind Manetho's establishment of a new dynasty, headed by King Ahmose who, despite being the brother of King Kamose, the final king of the 17th dynasty and a hero of the military resistance against the invaders, is unknown to us. King Ahmose's leadership ended one era and start a new one, which may have been the reason for Manetho to establish a new dynasty. Manetho may have founded a new dynasty with King Ahmose because of his successful removal of the Hyksos plague, which put an end to an age and brought in a flourishing new one. Thebes was the birthplace of the 18th dynasty, which ruled for more than 2 centuries. It is suggested that the kings of this family be arranged as follows: Ahmose I, Amenhotep I, Thutmose I, Thutmose II, Queen Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, Thutmose IV, Amenhotep III, Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten, Smenkhare, Tutankhamun, I, Horemheb. King Ahmose, Neb-Pedi-Re. Reigned from 1570 to 1546. Ahmose, who was contemporaneous with the rulers of the Kingdom of Kush in Nubia, who were en route to form an alliance with the Hyksos in order to eradicate national power in Egypt, considered eradicating the influence of the regional rulers and their power, which had become a threat to the unity of Egypt, after he destroyed the Hyksos, followed them to Palestine, and freed the country from them. For this reason, Ahmose led an army to the south to crush the rebels in Nubia, and the country returned to Egypt bearing gold mines and diorite quarries as symbols of its wealth. In addition, he reconstructed the forts there, highlighting the Buin fort at the Second Cataract in particular. Ahmose was able to bring peace and stability back there as a result. During his reign, the title Viceroy of Kush appeared for the first time in the history of ancient Egypt. Later, it evolved into Son of the King in Kush, a position King Ahmose had created so he would have a representative there in charge of looking after this region, protecting it, and keeping the king informed of all important events occurring there. Since Ahmose imposed his will on the military apparatus and pushed people to enlist, the populace adored it and even saw opportunities for development based on merit rather than bloodline. Ahmose thus established the framework for the first organized Egyptian army to be constituted. During his tenure, he cleared away the remains of foreign invaders and attended to internal political, agricultural, administrative, and religious matters, bringing peace, security, and order back to both the nation and its people's souls. The king's mother and wife, who fulfilled a holy religious duty in the temple, were bestowed with the title, for the first time, God's wife of Amun during Ahmose's reign, which was motivated by his interest in the lawful succession of the royal family. As a result, it became essential that the crown prince be the son of a royal princess, who happens to be a king's daughter, a king's wife, and the daughter of the god's wife of Amun. Queen Ahmose Nefertari, the mother of King Amenhotep I and the sister and wife of King Ahmose, was the first to assume this title. Ahmose exploited a new quarry at Tura to mine limestone for building temples and other shrines dedicated to the gods in Luxor, Abydos, and Heliopolis. There was a text discovered that mentioned the 22nd year of Ahmose's reign. This text indicates Ahmose's desire to build temples in order to appease the gods and people responsible for their service. Although Ahmose's tomb has not yet been located, the general consensus is that he dug it close to his forebears, the 17th dynasty kings, in the Dra Abu el-Naga region of the Thebes western mainland. Even after he passed away, his memory was clear. Instead, he was worshipped by the Egyptians, who placed a high value on it in Abydos. Before we leave the reign of King Ahmose, we should honor 3 of this family's women who were instrumental in the liberation struggles and creating a resistance mentality in the Egyptian populace. They are as follows. 1. Queen Teti Sheri. She is the wife of King Seqenenret Tau I, the mother of King Seqenenret Tau II, and the mother of his wife Ahotep. Given that her parents are commoners, Queen Teti Sheri is not descended from royalty. She lived the period of armed struggle at the end of the 17th dynasty, and was contemporary of her husband, son, and grandson, King Kamose. She experienced the period of military conflict near the close of the 17th dynasty. She passed away during the reign of her second grandson, King Ahmose. Her grandson, King Ahmose, who stayed faithful to her all of his life, built a shrine in Abydos to bear her name forever after discovering 2 statues of her in Thebes. Even though his grandmother has a tomb and a temple in Thebes honoring her memory, King Ahmose ordered the construction of a pyramid in the Holy Land in Abydos because he wanted to honor her and preserve her memory, according to a stela discovered there. In addition, he gave the order to build a shrine in her honor. Never before had previous kings treated their mothers in such a way. Its lake would be dug, trees planted, sacrifices installed, and religious ceremonies performed by priests for her. 2. Queen Ahotep. She is King Ahmose's mother and the wife of King Seqenenret II. After Queen Teti Sheri, she took up the role of the family's female before Ahmose wedded Queen Ahmose Nefertari. According to a lengthy passage found on the stela of Ahmose, which was discovered in front of the 8th pylon in Karnak and dates to the start of his reign, he extols his mother and orders everyone to sanctify her because she was the mistress of the Egyptians and the mistress of the Mediterranean islands. The royal wife, the royal sister of a king, and the royal mother. She is the magnificent one who is concerned with Egyptian concerns. It is the one that brought the troops together, kept the populace safe, brought the runaways back, and rounded up the immigrants. It is the one that put an end to the recalcitrant ones and calmed the Egyptian revolution in Upper Egypt. Ahotep, the great royal woman, may she have given life. The preceding paragraph makes evident the significant role Queen Ahotep played in safeguarding Egypt. This occurred most likely when the regional rulers lost control of affairs following the passing of either King Seqenenret II or his son, King Kamose. The fact that we discovered an inscription with Ahotep's name adjacent to King Ahmose's name in Buin at the Second Cataract suggests that Ahotep may have been addressed to her son at the outset of his reign over all of Egypt. 3. Queen Ahmose Nefertari. The third lady we will discuss about King Ahmose is his wife, Queen Ahmose Nefertari. She was mentioned and her image was sketched and engraved in several locations, including Sinai, Torah, and Nubia, as well as on multiple stelae, some of which were discovered in Abydos and others in the Karnak. The factors that propelled her and her son, King Amenhotep, to the upper echelons of the gods are unknown to us. The Egyptians had been looking upon her with reverence, worship, and devotion since the late 18th dynasty. King Amenhotep, her son, wrote inscriptions honoring her and her magnificence. She and her son, the king, were revered as the cemetery's guardian gods, and a shrine was erected in her honor on the western mainland of Thebes. In later times, up until the end of the New Kingdom, she was also revered as a protector of artists and artisans, and their village, Deir el-Medina, on Thebes' western flank, celebrated special rites in her honor. King Amenhotep I, Jo-Serkari, reigned from 1546 to 1526 BC. Following the passing of King Ahmose, his father, King Amenhotep I, came to power. According to the history of Manetho, he ruled for 20 years and 7 months. Here, Manetho was successful in establishing the length of the king's reign, since this is indicated in a text carved on the tomb of Amenemhat, a prominent Theban statesman. No. C2. He served under the rule of King Amenhotep I for 21 years. In the 9th year of King Amenhotep I's reign, on the 9th day of the 11th month, the dog star Sirius made its rising, according to a writing discovered on the verso of the Ebers medical papyrus. Experts in archaeological astronomy in ancient Egypt were able to determine the star's heliacal rise date, which they believed to be 1537 BC. Without a doubt, figuring out this date assisted in estimating the years that the New Kingdom's kings ruled. During his reign, the king worked to strengthen the kingdom's foundations. General Ahmose, son of Lady Ibana, wrote his autobiography on the walls of his tomb in the El Kab region, and it tells us that he was a contemporary of Kings Amos, Amenhotep I, and Thutmose I, and that he took part in their wars. These inscriptions also tell us that throughout King Amenhotep I's reign, Nubia experienced peace and quiet as he militarily put an end to the revolutionaries. Following that, Amenhotep I started to construct shrines to the gods and hypostyle halls in Thebes. Here, we discuss the alabaster shrine that has withstood the test of time. The pylon that the king Amenhotep III constructed at Karnak was the third pylon, which is where the French engineer H. Chevalier discovered all of its stones. Amenhotep III prevented these shrines from disappearing for us when he ordered the use of stones from multiple shrines to fill this pylon, even though he was unaware of this. H. Chevalier reconstructed it in what is today known as the Open Museum, which is situated north of the interior following the Karnak complex's first courtyard. The grounds behind the ancient Egyptians believed that King Amenhotep I was the founder of Thebes are unknown to us. Instead, he was revered as their guardian by the Deir el-Medina artisans and craftspeople, who also raised him and his mother Nefertari to the status of gods and made offerings and invocations to them on special occasions and holidays. Since Amenhotep I's tomb has not yet been discovered in the Valley of the Kings, some people theorize that he would have chosen to live forever in the Dara Abu el-Naga region of Thebes on the western mainland. But the tomb that they identify with him here is an uninscribed tomb that contains no evidence of its ancestry to Amenhotep I. But King Amenhotep I was the first to use a novel technique that divided the rock-cut tomb, which houses the mummy, from the temple honoring his memory, which houses rituals that help him in the netherworld. This was confirmed by the discovery of the temple honoring his memory close to the cultivated land in western Thebes. The legitimate wife of the king Amenhotep, Queen Ahotep, bore him no male children. However, he did have a son named Thutmose from his second marriage, which was illegitimate. After his father's passing away, Thutmose succeeded to the throne by marrying Princess Amos, who was probably descended from the royal family. King Thutmose I, a keeper Kari, reigned from 1525 to 1512 BC. After King Amenhotep I passed away, Thutmose I took the throne in Egypt, despite the fact that his mother, Sinesenab, lacked royal ancestry. Despite the fact that she was neither the king's legal wife nor his daughter, he was nevertheless able to ascend to the throne by marrying Princess Amos, who was most likely a woman of highborn descent and a member of the royal family, as we previously discussed. According to the history of Manetho, he ruled for 12 years and 9 months. When Thutmose I came to power, he sent a royal edict to the governor of Nubia, the viceroy king of Kush, known as Turi, stating that he had taken the throne of Egypt and was now the king of both lands. It also tells him the various titles that go with his name while making offerings to the gods and goddesses, and it tells him that he has to follow his instructions. From the inscription, which dates back to the second year of his reign, was discovered on a rock in front of Tombos Island at the Third Cataract, we know that he launched a military campaign to secure the southern borders, which during his reign reached 200 kilometers south of Napata at the Fourth Cataract, after the remains of an Egyptian fortress from his reign were discovered in the nearby Korgos church there. Subsequently, the king focused his efforts on Asia Minor. He went to Naharan, the name for Mesopotamia in ancient Egyptian, where he engaged in combat and took many of his enemies as prisoner. After leaving a stone stela bearing his name commemorating this triumph, he came back. King Thutmose III made reference to it in his annals during his 8th military campaign, mentioning that he had erected a stone stela adjacent to it. If Egypt's southern frontiers had reached the Fourth Cataract during the reign of Thutmose I, then its northern limits for the first time in ancient Egyptian history, came into contact with the waters that flow in the opposite direction, downstream to the south. This is a reference to the Euphrates River, which flows from north to south in reverse to the Nile River's current. As we previously discussed, Thutmose III was the first king to utilize the Valley of the Kings as the location for his royal tomb. Regarding the king's temple, Thutmose I gave the order to have it cut close to the cultivated area on Thebes' western mainland. King Thutmose II, a keeper and reigned from 1512 to 1504 BC. Following the passing of his father, King Thutmose I, King Thutmose II came to the throne. He was the son of Mutneferet, an illegitimate second wife. But his marriage to Princess Hatshepsut, the daughter of King Thutmose I and Queen Kamose, gave him the legal right to govern. King Thutmose II led an army to destroy the rebels in Nubia, and he succeeded in doing so, according to a stela he erected during his first year of power while traveling from Aswan to the island of Philae. The Nubian leader's only surviving child was the one he took back to Thebes as a prisoner. We also know from the autobiography of General Amos Pen Nekbet, who ordered it to be engraved on the walls of his tomb in the El Kab region, and who lived and served under the reigns of Amos through Thutmose III, that King Thutmose II personally went to subjugate the Shazza tribes, who are Bedouins living in northeastern and southern Palestine, and that he captured many of them. The tomb, which the king carved out in the Valley of the Kings, is uninscribed. It seems to have been abandoned and has a sarcophagus devoid of inscriptions inside. The Deir el-Bahari cache contained the mummies of Kings Thutmose I, II, and III. Additionally, a small, shoddy temple honoring the ruler was discovered. After a brief reign, Thutmose II passed away while he was yet 30 years old. He bequeathed a daughter, Nefertari, from his sister and first legitimate wife, Hatshepsut, and a son, Thutmose III, later the king, from a secondary, illegitimate wife, Isis. Queen Hatshepsut, Mot-Kari, reigned from 1503 to 1482 BC. Following the death of his father Thutmose II, Thutmose III rose to the throne of Egypt, although his right to do so was based on a prophecy fulfilled by the deity Amun, who designated him to succeed his father as king. To establish his claim to the throne, Thutmose III might have wed Hatshepsut's daughter, Nefertari. When Thutmose III became a king, he was young, and Hatshepsut was simultaneously his stepmother, his aunt, and, in the instance of his marriage to her daughter, Nefertari, his wife's mother. As the daughter of a king's sister, a royal wife, and a divine wife, Hatshepsut was a powerful, mature, experienced, and ambitious lady. With her strength and charisma from the start, Hatshepsut was able to take charge of the country's affairs and manage them. However, she was not content with this, and in the second year of King Thutmose II's reign, she managed to stop him from abdicating permanently and even made him withdraw. She also ordered that she be crowned king with the consent and desire of her father, the god Amun, as is recorded on the walls of the temple honoring her memory in Deir el-Bahari, western Thebes. As the god Horus' earthly embodiment, Hatshepsut assumed the role of the deity and became queen of Egypt. She adopted the title Son of the Sun and even dressed in men's uniforms to mimic their appearance. She also made use of the king's fake regal beard. During her 20 years in power, Hatshepsut focused entirely on building architecture, with the exception of one military expedition she sent to Nubia to put an end to the rebels there. Under the leadership of Commander Nasi, Hatshepsut authorized the dispatch of a naval expedition of 5 ships to Punt, the land of incense near Somalia, in order to convey the products of this country to Egypt in the 6th or 7th year of her reign. Starting point of the sea voyage was one of the Red Sea ports close to Wadi Jajus. This naval expedition is shown on the walls of the temple honoring her in Deir el-Bahari, and is regarded as one of the most significant inscriptions for studying Punt and its products. In order to deliver the first pair of her obelisks, Hatshepsut also dispatched a mission to the Aswan quarries. An inscription detailing that he was the one who responsible for carving the 2 obelisks for the divine wife and the great royal wife, Hatshepsut was given to us by the engineer Senenmut there in Aswan. The queen gave an order for one of her senior officials, known as Amenhotep, to lead a mission to Aswan to oversee the cutting of another pair of obelisks in the 15th year of Thutmose II's reign, or the 13th year of Hatshepsut's reign. This official left us 2 inscriptions attesting to the fact that he completed this work, one on Suhail Island, 4 kilometers south of Aswan, and the other in his tomb, number 73, west of Thebes. Only one of these two obelisks remain in the Karnak complex. We know Queen Hatshepsut made considerable use of turquoise mines because of the inscriptions discovered on the walls of the Serapet El-Qadim temple in Sinai, the most important place for turquoise mining. Senenmut, the engineer and tutor who oversaw the education of Hatshepsut's daughter, Nefertari, was regarded as her most famous servant during her reign. It appears that she had favored him, as he permitted himself to have his image engraved on the walls of multiple niches or shrines in the temple honoring her memory, just behind the wooden door, out of sight when the door was opened. We do not yet know why he chose to have his image engraved in these hallowed locations within the goddess Hathor's shrine, but the fact that he is an engineer and an educator rather than a member of the royal family may have been a factor in Hatshepsut's decision to have the images removed and altered when she found them. Or that this mutilation was done after her death by King Thutmosis III's allies. How Queen Hatshepsut's life ended is still unknown. Did she pass away naturally? Or was her death tragic since her mummy were never discovered in any of her the tombs in western Thebes, the Sikhet Takhet Zaid, or the Valley of the Kings, or the cache of mummies in Deir el-Bahari, or any other place? Regarding the temple honoring her memory, it is currently a well-known temple, under the name of the Deir el-Bahari temple in the western side of Thebes. King Thutmose III, Menkaure. From 1504 to 1450 BC. He came to power following the death of Hatshepsut, or after her expulsion from the throne and the execution of her and all of her supporters. The remains of Thutmose III's rule bore witness to his furious rage, as his supporters defaced her sculptures, scribbled over her names, and warped her images. Since taking the throne following the passing of his father, King Thutmose II, Thutmose III has been regarded as the start of his reign. Instead, we know that other king lists, like the Abydos list and the Karnak list, purposefully left out Hatshepsut's reign because they believed she was usurping the monarchy and not adhering to old Egyptian customs. With the start of the Hurrian migrations in the 18th century BC, the situation in Asia Minor started to shift, and Thutmose III became interested in the country's foreign policy, something Hatshepsut had neglected for 20 years. They are individuals from Central Asia, whose race is still unknown. There are those who think they are part of the Aryan race, and others who think they are Indo-European. Following their migration, some of these people established city-states in Syria and the Fertile Crescent, while others established the state of the Mitanni or the Mitannians on the frontiers of Iraq. Additionally, some of their tribes relocated to Anatolia, where they established the state of the Hittites, which was close to the state of the Mitanni. Assyria lies to the south, while the kingdom of Babylon was established near the Persian Gulf in the southern region. It took 3 centuries for all of this to culminate in the 15th century BC. Control over the entry points for migration, whether from northern Syria or the frontiers of Iraq, was the threat posed by the Mitanni kingdom in the northeast of the Levant, close to the Khabur and Euphrates rivers. Under the direction of the prince of the city of Kadesh on the Oront River, the princes of the Mitanni state were able to form an alliance with the princes of Palestine and Syria. Thutmosis III saw that Egyptian authority had diminished, and he was forced, upon learning of this, to begin a military campaign aimed at consolidating the foundations of his reign in Asia Minor. As the situation in Syria worsened and the princes there gained more autonomy, His Majesty moved swiftly to invade the Levant in order to combat the traitors there and reward his supporters. Therefore, he went ahead at the head of his army from Kantara and marched 241 kilometers in 10 days to reach Gaza, where he ushered in the 23rd year of his reign. He traveled another 129 kilometers in 11 days between Gaza and one of the cities at the foot of Mount Carmel. Then, after learning that the Prince of Kadesh had arrived in the Palestinian city of Megiddo and had gathered 330 princes and their armies around him and camped in the fortified city there to prevent the king and his army from advancing into the Megiddo corridor. There, Thutmose III held a war council with his officers. Thutmose III determined that the army should advance down the shortest, riskiest, and furthest path away from the enemy's line of sight. There were 3 routes to Megiddo, however, 2 of them circumnavigated the base of Mount Carmel, while the third road was a tiny one that led straight to the city. The following day, at first light, Thutmose III led his army into a surprise attack on the city of Megiddo, waging a war of surprise. They attacked in the shape of a semicircle. The Asian troops who were defending it scattered and ran away, leaving their massive war chariots and their camp full of loot behind. Sadly, they were unable to enter the fortified city in time to escape with their lives, as their fellow Asian warriors had locked the city's gates behind them. His Majesty's soldiers would have seized Megiddo at that moment if they had not set their hearts on seizing what the enemy had left, the Egyptian text claimed. Due to this error, the Egyptian army was forced to besiege Megiddo for an additional 7 months, during which time it relinquished all of its supplies, including more than 900 massive war chariots, horses, and weapons. The Prince of Kadesh managed to flee after the battle, but the princes within sent their kids with weapons to give them to King Thutmose III. Hatshepsut and Thutmose III had different approaches to running the state. Hatshepsut was proud of her efforts to change Egypt's internal affairs and was worried about the nation's internal problems. Regarding Thutmose III, he was an unstoppable warrior and unmatched leader. His military battles and successes were very important to him, and he even had them documented on the walls of the Annals Hall in the Karnak complex. He was the first to bring scribes and scrolls on his war operations so they could document all that happened and write it down on papyrus scrolls. There were 16 military campaigns conducted by Thutmose III, the most well-known of which being the first one he launched against the city of Megiddo in the 22nd year of his reign. During his 6th war, which he launched in the 31st year of his rule, he succeeded in destroying and taking control of Kadesh. He overthrew that wicked enemy in Naharan during his 8th campaign, which took place in the 33rd year of his reign. By this, he refers to the monarch of the Mitanni state, the Mitannians, who considered expanding his sphere of influence to include the countries west of the Euphrates River. With all the energy he could muster, Thutmose III crossed the Euphrates River leading his army and pursued the Mitanni, who panicked and fled in front of him. On the eastern side of the Euphrates River, the king left for us a stela to honor and document his triumph. The inscription on the Jebel Barkal stela tells us that during Thutmose III's 46th year of reign, the Egyptian army arrived at Jebel Barkal at the 4th cataract in the city of Napata, which served as his reign's symbolic southern border and was the site of several temples and castles. During Thutmose III's reign, one of his most well-known employees was the minister Rekamir, whose tomb, number 100, in the Sheikh El Kurna cemetery provided us with a complete account of all the work he performed and oversaw. In a text he left for us, he even mentioned the prohibitions the king had declared when he was appointed as a minister. Justifiably, the constitution is regarded as defining the dynamic between the ruler and the ruled. Thutmose III left for us numerous monuments in Thebes that honor his name forever. He also left for us numerous temples erected in different locations across Egypt, including his temples in Abydos, Kift, Armant, El Kab, Elephantine, Semna, and lastly Jebel Barkal. On the western side of Thebes, in the Valley of the Kings, the king gave the order to have his tomb dug. King Amenhotep II, Aa-Kheper-Re, reigned from 1450 to 1425 BC. When King Thutmose III passed away, King Amenhotep II came to power. According to an inscription on a wall in the tomb of the commander Amenemhep, number 85, in Thebes, King Thutmose III ascended to heaven and united with the god Re, and his pure limbs merged with the one who created them. He ascended to the throne of his father, King Amenhotep II, and took on royal titles as the sun rose on the 2nd day. As evidenced by numerous stelae and monuments, both in text and image, King Amenhotep II received military sports instruction. His likeness can be seen on one of the walls of Officer Min's, number 109, tomb in Thebes. He oversaw Amenhotep's military training and instructed him in archery. He also addressed the prince, saying, "Using all the strength in your arms, stretch the bow to your ear and steady the arrow, O Prince Amenhotep." Additionally, we know that King Amenhotep II enjoyed participating in a variety of physical sports, was fervent about equestrianism, and was captivated by his youth and muscular power thanks to a stone stela that Salim Hassan discovered in 1936 adjacent to the Sphinx. He had learned all the techniques of Montu, the god of war, by the time he turned 18. Following his accession to the Egyptian throne, some of the city-states of Syria revolted, forcing Amenhotep II to lead his army in a military expedition there in the third year of his rule. These uprisings frequently took place to gauge the new king's strength and the Egyptian government's authority. These city-states had the ability to remove him if he was unable to destroy the recalcitrant, and they won't lose anything if they are destroyed. According to a granite stela discovered in the Karnak complex, the king killed the rebels and severely abused them. We also know from two purposefully written stelae in Nubia and Elephantine that His Majesty returned to his father Amun in a happy manner after he had killed the 7 chiefs in the Taxi area, which is situated on the Oronte River, south of Kadesh, and hung them upside down on the prow of His Majesty's ship. According to a granite stela discovered in the Karnak complex, the king killed the rebels and severely abused them. We also know from two purposefully written stelae in Nubia and Elephantine that His Majesty returned to his father Amun in a happy manner after he had killed the 7 chiefs in the Taxi area, which is situated on the Oronte River, south of Kadesh, and hung them upside down on the prow of His Majesty's ship. 6 were hung in front of the Theban wall, and the 7th was sent to be hung on the wall of Napata as a demonstration to them of his strength. During his reign, one of the most well-known employees was Kinaman, who carved his tomb, number 93, in the Sheikh Abd el-Kurna cemetery. The gifts that Kinaman gave to his king Amenhotep II on the occasion of the new year were perhaps the most significant of the scenes depicted on the tomb walls. Using the same method as his father Thutmose III's tomb, Amenhotep II ordered his own tomb to be cut in Thebes Valley of the Kings. His tomb is regarded as one of the most exquisite ones that the 18th dynasty's rulers of Thebes left behind. King Thutmose IV, Menkaure, reigned from 1425 to 1417 BC. After King Amenhotep II passed away in the 26th year of his reign, his son King Thutmosis IV took over and ruled for 9 years while living in peace. However, as soon as he came to power, he started a campaign to put an end to the traditional revolution in Syria, and in the 8th year of his reign, he led a campaign to Nubia to crush the rebels there. The granite stela from the first year of his rule, which is still situated between the Sphinx's claws in Giza, is one of the most well-known monuments that still stand from his reign. Through text engraved on it, the king tells us that, following an exhausting hunting expedition, he went to take refuge in the statue's shadow as a young man. He fell asleep and dreamed that the god Horemheb, who was incarnate in the statue, had informed him that he will be crowned as a king of Egypt after he had rescued it from the sand that had covered it. Apparently, as soon as Thutmose IV came to power, his wish to befriend the god Horemheb was granted. This account demonstrates that he was not the rightful heir, and for that reason he made up this prophecy to inform us that the deity Horemheb had selected him to be king. In a brave move for his country's foreign policy, Thutmose IV married Artatama, the daughter of the Mitanni king. This marriage had 2 significances. It declared the end of the 2 countries' war because the Hittite kingdom was now their shared enemy, and it confirmed Egypt's recognition of the Mitanni state. This Mitannian princess was given the Egyptian name Mut-Emwiya by the Egyptians, and she subsequently gave birth to Prince Amenhotep III, who took over his father's kingdom in Egypt. The front of the king's war chariot was adorned with scenes from the battlefield during Thutmosis IV's reign. They are the same scenes that were later used to decorate temple pylon facades across the New Kingdom and beyond. The Egyptian Museum currently has the king's war chariot on exhibit after it was discovered in his tomb in western Thebes. Although Thutmose IV gave the order to have his tomb in the Valley of the King's Cut, the temple built in his honor has been totally destroyed. King Amenhotep III, Nebmat-Re. Reigned from 1417 to 1379 BC. Amenhotep III, the son of Thutmose IV, succeeded him as king of Egypt. He declared himself to be the son of the deity Amun-Re, just as Hatshepsut had done on the walls of her temple in Deir el-Bahari. He wrote this narrative on the walls of the Luxor temple's birth chamber. The character of Thutmose IV, who marries Queen Mut-Emwiya to give birth to Crown Prince Amenhotep, is shown there as the god Amun-Re. The second year of King Amenhotep III's reign saw the marriage of Tai. Tai was an ordinary woman, not descended from the royal family. The mother was Thea, while the father, Yuya, served as a priest in the Akhmim temple dedicated to the god Min. She is referred to as Amun's great harem. Whether it was in the life of her husband or her son Akhenaten, Tai was a significant figure in the history of the Egyptian Empire. Tai, his wife, was a strong-willed and ambitious individual. She had the ability to dictate how things would go in the Egyptian state. Amenhotep III started a new custom of writing significant occasions on the backs of comparatively large scarabs. For instance, the so-called marriage scarabs, which document the king's union with Tai, have the following inscriptions: King Amenhotep, to whom life was given, and the great royal wife, Tai given life. Her mother's name is Thea, and her father's name is Yuya. She is the wife of a mighty king, the borders of which stretch northward to the country of Naharan and south to Kari, which is close to Napata. Given that she was sculpted beside him in the same size as him, the king and his wife Tai are shown sitting side by side in a colossal double statue at the Egyptian Museum. It would appear that Queen Tai had a significant influence and powerful effect on her husband. Prior to his rule, this custom was not seen, and memorial scarabs even made reference to her. Seeing Queen Tai's name and her parents' names engraved on scarabs is intriguing. The king's marriage to Kilukip, the daughter of the Mitanni king Shutarna, which took place in the 10th year of his reign in the 10th year of the reign of His Majesty King Amenhotep and the great royal wife Queen Tai. May she have given life. Yuya is her father's name and Thea is her mother's name. She brought to His Majesty Kilukip, the daughter of the Lord of Naharan, Shutarna, brought with her 317 of the ladies of her harem to His Majesty. As we know from an inscription on another scarab, Amenhotep II ordered that a big pond measuring 3,700 by 700 Egyptian cubits, 1 cubit is 0.52 meters, be cut for Queen Tai and her maids to sail upon. This indicates that he most likely granted all of Queen Tai's wishes. It took 2 weeks to dig the pond. Considering that the pond in question is the Habu Pond, which is situated on Thebes' western side, this is a hard statement to accept. It is also mentioned in an inscription on a fourth scarab that Amenhotep III was able to hunt 102 wild lions in the first 10 years of his reign, indicating that the king enjoyed hunting at the beginning of his reign. Furthermore, there is no way to believe or refute this tale. Maybe this suggests that Amenhotep III and his followers had a life of luxury, extravagance, indulgence in pleasures, and a propensity for ease. After the situation in the ancient Egyptian empire stabilized, the state's coffers overflowed, and Egypt started to reap the benefits of its conflicts, whether in Asia Minor or Nubia, as the riches of the ancient world was accumulated in pharaonic Egypt to appease the king. All of this is evident in the works of art and architecture. When it comes to religious architecture, we can see it in the layout of the Luxor temple as well as in the exquisite landscape and carvings that the king created. The accuracy with which the ancient Egyptian artist executed the tombs of individuals is also evident, as are some of the tombs that pertain to his reign. Examples of such tombs are the tomb of Ramos, number 55, and the tomb of Karuf, number 192, two of the most influential individuals of his time. These tombs attest to the beauty and elegance of the scenes and demonstrate the artist's inventiveness in capturing these masterworks of colored or non-colored drawings and engravings on the exterior walls of these tombs. Amenhotep son of Habu was one of King Amenhotep III's most well-known engineers. He came from a modest background in the Banha city. He started off in the army as a scribe before becoming the king's advisor. He was in charge of getting everything ready for the said festivals. At the age of 80, he passed away. He was the only one of the commoners' persons for whom a temple was constructed in western Thebes, where he was later worshipped as a model minister, and numerous of his statues have been discovered. A collection of letters from the offices of Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten, exchanged between both kings and between the monarchs and governors of their reigns in the Levant on the other hand, were discovered in Tel El Amarna in 1887. These clay tablets are known as the Amarna tablets. These tablets might be a perfect replica of the letters delivered to be stored in the state archives. These tablets are inscribed in the Babylonian language, which was written in cuneiform on tablets made of unburned clay, with the exception of just 2 Hittite letters. At that time, the language of diplomacy was Babylonian. The interchange of gifts and donations between ancient Egypt and foreign kings, as well as the diplomatic marriage between the king of Egypt and the daughter of one of the Mitannian monarchs, are 2 of the most significant subjects discussed in these letters. Funny enough, the Egyptian king was happy to welcome non-Egyptian princesses into his harem. However, when the contemporary Babylonian king asked for his daughter, the Egyptian king apologized, declaring that never before in time immemorial has an Egyptian princess been given to any person. During his 38-year reign, Amenhotep III is said to have sent no military expedition to Asia Minor to establish Egyptian dominance there. However, in the 5th year of his reign, one of his generals, known as Mary Mose, the owner of Theban tomb number 383, was dispatched to put an end to the uprising in Nubia. In the 30, 34, and 37th years of his reign, the king celebrated the said festival 3 times. Amenhotep, son of Habu, the king's counselor and engineer, oversaw the planning of these festivities. In the 38th year of his reign, King Amenhotep III passed away and was buried in the Valley of the Kings. King Amenhotep IV, Neferkheperre, Wainri, reigned from 1379 to 1362 BC. Modern research and excavations have demonstrated that King Amenhotep IV ascended to the throne immediately upon his father Amenhotep III's death, rather than sharing authority with him. According to the previously mentioned Amarna correspondence, Queen Tai, the mother of Amenhotep IV, wrote to the Mitanni king Tushratta, the son of the Mitanni king Shutarna, to inform him of her husband Amenhotep III's passing and to beg him to maintain his amicable relationship with her son, Amenhotep IV, the new king of Egypt. These letters suggest that Amenhotep IV did not take the throne of Egypt until after the passing of his father, Amenhotep III. Tushratta replied to Queen Tai's letter by stating that she must persuade her son, the king, to maintain these cordial relations between Egypt and the state of the Mitanni. It also serves as evidence of Queen Tai's power, both in terms of domestic and international affairs. The outcomes of the construction of the Akhenaten temple further demonstrated that King Amenhotep IV was not his father's equal in authority. Amenhotep IV constructed a temple for the deity Aten at the start of his reign in Thebes, and the 50,000 stones that have been found so far do not include any mention of his father, Amenhotep III. We would have seen his father's name or image engraved on the stones of this temple if Amenhotep IV and his father had been ruling partners. In her dissertation, Zakia Zaki also provided an explanation of the most current evidence demonstrating that Amenhotep IV did not share his father's rule. At the age of 16, Amenhotep IV took up the throne in Thebes, with the early years of his reign being marked by assistance from his mother, Queen Tai. According to the Gebel El Silsila Stela, north of Qom Ombo, he began his existence by pledging loyalty to the state god Amun and even taking on the 5 customary hereditary titles for himself, just like his royal predecessors of that era. After that, he wed Nefertiti, a stunning and lovely woman whose nationality is still up for dispute among archaeologists. Although the consensus now is that she is the daughter of the officer I, who left for us a rock-cut tomb carrying his name in the Tel El Amarna necropolis, even if he was not buried there, some of them think she is Egyptian, and some think she is Mitannian. In the western Valley of the Kings, west of Thebes, he excavated a royal tomb for himself. This was the same individual who subsequently came to rule under the name King I. His initial tomb in Tel El Amarna has walls that display his wife's pride in serving as Nefertiti's wet nurse. It's thought that she might be I's second wife, whom he wed following the passing of Nefertiti's mother. Since Nefertiti was still a small child when his first wife passed away, the second wife nursed her. This is especially true given that the name of Nefertiti's sister, Mutneoimet, is written on the walls of the same tomb. The god Aten. Before Akhenaten started considering and advocating for his new religion, things had hardly settled for him. He was called Aten, the name of a single god who lives inside the sun's disk. Aten was nothing more than a fresh representation of a previously recognized solar phenomenon. It adopted a new name that debuted during the 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom. Two conceptions were used to characterize it specifically, the sun star and the god who resides in this star. Aten persisted in using these two interpretations until the arrival of Akhenaten, who freed it from the first and adopted the second. Actually, in the language of the ancient Egyptians, the word Aten took the place of the word god, Neter. It appears that after realizing that Aten was nothing more than an imitation of the ancient god Re of the city of Enshams, the priests of the god Amun were first forced to permit the king to construct the temple of the god Aten. Aten went inside the god Amun's stronghold. The priests of Amun interpreted this contentment on the grounds that their god was the greatest god, Amun, Re, the beloved god of the state throughout Egypt and even outside it, and that Aten was searching for followers and worshippers for him. Akhenaten built a massive temple for it east of the temple of Amun at Karnak. As a result, Aten was admitted into the Karnak sanctuary and given god status among the ancient Egyptians. In order to be the only one to serve his god, Aten, Akhenaten gave his full attention to the call to worship god Aten. In order to be the only one to serve his god, Aten, he chose Aten as his own god, dedicated himself to his worship, and adopted the title of the first servant of the god Re-Horakti who rejoices in the horizon, in his name Shu, which is the Aten. While his subjects honored Akhenaten, who rose to become one of the gods, only Akhenaten and his family worshipped the god Aten. According to the texts, King Akhenaten had a priest who served him during his lifetime and had the same title as Akhenaten in connection to Aten, which is the name of his throne or prenomen. Amun's priests started to notice that the new deity was different from the previous Egyptian gods, both in appearance and philosophy. He wasn't personified as an animal, as most of their gods were, or as a human, except at the beginning and in rare cases. Rather, he was the life-giving and happiness-filling force concealed in the sun's disk. The figure that was authorized by Ma'at, the goddess of truth, honesty, and justice, and which he saw with certain artistic embellishments of a religious nature, was the one that Akhenaten favored. We discover that he was depicted as a solar disk with the royal uraeus at its center and rays coming out of it that resembled lines and ended in human hands. Some of them bear one of two symbols, the Ankh sign, which represents life, or the Was sign, which represents happiness and are only directed at the queen's and king's noses. This could imply that they received the blessing from the god Aten, who then gave it to the people who were worshipping him. Like all the Egyptian gods, Aten's name was mentioned first, without a cartouche. Then came the second stage, the first of its sort in the history of ancient Egypt, where Aten's entire name was enclosed in two cartouches, precisely like the names of Egyptian kings, implying that he was given the same treatment as Egyptian kings. In fact, a new phase emerged to validate this interpretation, the addition of the supplications, that were frequently appended to the names of the Egyptian kings to Aten's name, such as, "May he be granted life forever." The priests now knew exactly what Akhenaten wanted, and they started planning ways to undermine him and his new faith. Despite this, he did not stop working on it. Instead, he declared it a never-ending war against Amun and his priests and changed his name from Amenhotep, which meant that Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, which meant the beneficial, or the useful or the sincere, to Aten in the 6th year of his reign. Then, he traced the name of Amun by erasing it to all the temples and sacred sites, and not only in Thebes but also in most of Egypt, including his own name. After declaring his new faith to be the official state religion, he was unable to remain in Thebes, so he moved to a new location he created for himself, his family, and those who followed him. He named it the Horizon of Aden, and it is currently the city of Tel El Amarna, which is located on the eastern bank of the Nile close to Malwi in Minya. In order to demarcate the boundaries of his new city to the west and east, Akhenaten erected 14 rock-cut stelae at Tel El Amarna. In addition, he had temples dedicated to the deity Aten built there, and he had a massive royal mausoleum built for himself and his family. Regarding the nobles' tombs during his rule, they are different from those of the nobles in western Thebes and are rock-cut into the eastern mountains. The king and his family were shown in several large-scale images on the walls of the nobles' tombs at Tel El Amarna, while the tomb owners were depicted in smaller-scale scenes. As with Thebes, the walls of the nobles' tombs were adorned with scenes from the world, religion, and death, as we shall see later. The deceased, the owner of the tomb, assumed a prominent role in each of these events in clear large size. Some people think that the artwork created at Amarna during Akhenaten's reign depicts the reality in which the king lived. His enormous statues, which are presently on display at the Egyptian Museum, exaggerate Ma'at, which means the truth. They display the king's feeble physique, his delicately outlined narrow face, his thoughtful eyes, and his rounded, curved thighs. Put otherwise, it exhibits the king in the manner that most likely depicts him in reality rather than in the framework that presents the person in the greatest light, which is the art that was produced both before and after his reign. Scenes from his reign's commencement, however, demonstrate that the artists of Akhenaten's time started to portray him in this idealized framework, a representation that might not accurately reflect what he represents actually in reality. The king Akhenaten was not a fighter. Egypt started to lose control over the northern region of its empire during his reign because he disregarded the foreign policy of the kingdom. The communications from the Asian monarchs pleading with Akhenaten for assistance were disregarded since he was preoccupied with his religion and beliefs. Meeting the messengers who traveled from Asia to see him did not concern him. Taking advantage of the circumstances, the Hittite king Suppiluliuma expanded his rule over the Mitanni state and conquered all of Syria. The Phoenician cities fell one after another as a result of all of this, and the king of Egypt did nothing to protect his empire. The people of one city, Tunub, wrote to the king of Egypt more than 20 letters pleading for assistance, saying, "And now your city of Tunub is crying and its tears are flowing, and there is no helper for it." 20 letters have been dispatched to the king of Egypt, our lord, but no response has been received. When Akhenaten was only 32 years old, he passed away. The god king passed away, making it impossible for his followers to carry on their faith. When Akhenaten passed away, his beliefs and religion also died. The subjects lost their living symbol and, with it, their channel of communication with the god Aten lost. King Tutankhamun, Nebkipri, reigned from 1361 to 1352. In the final years of his life, Akhenaten ruled alongside the husband of his eldest daughter, Merit-Aten, also known as Smenkhar, though their relationship is still unknown. Nevertheless, it is known from a hieratic text found in the Peri tomb, number 139, dated from that year, that one of the priests and scribes of the sacred offerings to the god Amun in the temple of Smenkhar in Thebes raises his prayers to the god Amun, indicating that Smenkhar returned to Thebes in the third year of his reign following the death of Akhenaten. It appears that Smenkhar assumed all authority and died a year following Akhenaten's death. Following him was 8-year-old King Tutankhaten, who became the heir to the Egyptian throne. His level of proximity to the royal family is unknown yet. It is plausible that he is King Smenkhar's brother and that he attained the throne. Through his marriage to Ankhesenpaten, Akhenaten's third daughter, a name that would imply that she lives for the god Aten, he inherited the throne of Egypt. He received assistance from the god's father I in running the state's affairs. Tutankhaten was forced to convert to the worship of the god Amun 2 years after taking the throne in Egypt. In addition, he was made to adopt the name Tutankhamun, which means the living image of Amun, instead of Tutankhaten, which meant the living image of Aten. Additionally, he gave his wife the new name Ankhesenamun. That is to say, she lives for the god Amun, and it is possible that he traveled from Amarna to Thebes. Everything that was done to appease the priests of Amun, who were so overcome with victory that they started erasing every evidence of Akhenaten's rule they could reach. As I previously stated, Tutankhamun was driven to appease the priests and their gods, and as stated on a stela discovered within the Karnak complex, he was forced to restore the gods' temple ruins, even doubling their gold and silver assets and increasing the priestly staff in charge of them. Their pay is deducted from the Lord of the Two Lands' wealth in exchange for her services. Tutankhamun commanded that the Opet festivals, which commemorate the celebration the ancient Egyptians celebrated once a year when the deity Amun-Re left in his procession to visit his harem in the Luxor temple, be recorded on the walls of the 14 columns hall. Research on Tutankhamun's mummy indicates that he passed away in his 18th year of life, meaning that he ruled for 10 complete years, indicating that he died when he was extremely young. His whole tomb, untouched by tomb robbers, was found on November 4, 1922, and its wealth, which showed the lavishness and extravagance of the empire's king's lifestyle, may have contributed to his notoriety. It is important to remember that he was not a historical king despite possessing such an enormous collection of burial furnishings. What if he was weighed against other notable kings? In this instance, it could be possible to speculate on the type of burial furnishings that great kings like Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Seti I, and Ramesses II may have had. Most likely, he was buried in a modest tomb that wasn't ready for him. The priest I, who held the priestly title of God's father and who succeeded him to the throne of Egypt, was depicted on the walls of his royal tomb wearing the garments of priests carrying out the ritual of opening the mouth of the deceased king's mummy, oversaw the funeral preparations and rites. We now need to discuss a letter that King Ankhesenamun's widow most likely wrote to Suppiluliuma, the Hittite king at the time, saying, "My husband died and I did not have children, and I know that you have many children. He will be my husband if you send me one of them. I refuse to accept marriage to one of my subordinates." The request caught the monarch off guard, so he sent a message to make sure there was no ulterior motive. The messenger came back with a message from the queen telling him that she was forced to ask a Hittite prince to be her husband, even though it was not an easy task for her to do so. This communication revealed that, although he had intended to send her one of his sons, he was murdered upon route after coming under attack from the men and horses of Egypt. Consequently, the plot that was supposed to lead to this marriage fell through, and we are unaware of the queen's whereabouts. Was she given a penalty? Alternatively, she married the priest I, who went on to become king of Egypt, reigning for 4 years before being buried in his tomb in the western Valley of the Kings. It is important to notice, nonetheless, that her name is absent from the texts and inscriptions on this tomb. King Horemheb, Djoser Keeper-Re, reigned from 1348 to 1320 BC. King Horemheb was regarded by the authors of both the Abydos and Saqqara king lists as the first king after Amenhotep III, while the kings Akhenaten, Smenkhare, and Tutankhamun were purposefully left out because of their ties to the Atenism. Serving as the main commander of the Egyptian forces, Horemheb was the driving force behind King I's rule. Because there being no rightful heir, he was able to take the throne of Egypt with ease after his death due to the lack of a legitimate heir. Horemheb was able to regain the country's stability through military force after marrying Princess Mut-Nejmet, the sister of Queen Nefertiti. Given that Horemheb believed Akhenaten and his followers to be atheists, he had the temples and shrines they had constructed demolished and their stones used to fill the 3 pylons he had built in the Karnak complex, the 2nd to the west, the 9th, and the 10th to the south. Horemheb was unaware that with this act of revenge he had spared these buildings and their stones from destruction by carrying out this act of retaliation. Even though he did not live long enough to see the images and inscriptions on his first tomb, which he had built at Saqqara when he was still an officer, Horemheb abandoned it and built another worthy of his position as the country's king in the Valley of the Kings. We also know the account of his trip to Thebes to be formally crowned king, thanks to a stunning statue of him and his wife in the Turin Museum. Additionally, there is a stela of Karnak that, despite its distortions, describes the steps the king took to ensure justice in the country by shielding the weak from the strong and the impoverished from the wealthy. These are the texts commonly referred to as the Laws of Horemheb. In the 27th year of his reign, Horemheb passed away and was buried in the Valley of the Kings. 19th Dynasty, 1320 to 1200 BC. King Ramesses I, Menpadi Re, reigned from 1320 to 1318 BC. The Amarna era, which came to an end with King I's death, and the Ramesside era, which started with King Ramesses I, also known as Remessu in ancient Egyptian language, which means fathered by the god Re, the founder of the 19th dynasty, were separated by Horemheb. King Horemheb appears not to have had a male heir, therefore, he selected an elderly comrade who enlisted in the army alongside him, Horimessu, the leader of archers. LD. Two statues of him that were discovered in front of the 10th pylon of the Karnak complex depict him as a cross-legged royal scribe. These statues reveal that he held numerous titles prior to ascending to the Egyptian throne, including Chief Infantry of the Lord of the Two Lands, the Minister, and Viceroy of Upper and Lower Egypt. It's possible that King Horemheb gave him these roles because he trusted him and wanted him to succeed him in the throne. His monuments also reveal that, in the final days before taking the throne, he was referred to as the king's son. As far as we are aware, he was the son of a Delta officer named Seti rather than the son of the king. With Horemheb's passing away, Pa-Ramessu became the heir to the Egyptian throne. He changed his name to Remessu, or Ramesses, by removing the definite article Pa from his previous name. He gave the order to have his name inscribed inside the royal cartouche. Manetho, quoting the Jewish historian Josephus, states that he was king for only 1 year and 4 months. The monuments of Ramesses I are very rare that have been discovered thus far. Are some inscriptions from his reign located on the second pylon of the Karnak complex and in the Boan temple, which included a stela that mentioned the second year of his reign. However, it is most likely the work of his son Seti I, who also erected another stela in front of it that dates to the first year of his reign, suggesting that Seti I may have shared in his father's rule in his later years. The unfinished tomb of Ramesses I was located in the Valley of the Kings, west of Thebes. King Seti I, Menmat Re, reigned from 1318 to 1304 BC. He succeeded his father, Ramesses I, in the throne, and it appears that, as was previously said, he shared late life rule with him. Because he dated the first years of his reign as the Renaissance, the king had ushered in a new era in the history of ancient Egypt. His Neti title was Wehem Mesud, which literally means repetition of birth, but has a figurative meaning that could refer to the era of revivification or the Renaissance. For example, the texts mention, for example, the second year of King Seti I's era of repetition of birth, and astronomy was one of his interests. We must acknowledge, nevertheless, that this dynasty has taken a new and unfamiliar path. It is evident from the names of its kings, including Merneptah, Seti, and Ramesses. The gods Re, as Ramesses, Seth, as Seti, Enta, as Merneptah, were the havens for its kings. The reason for this could be that, unlike the kings of the 18th dynasty, who adopted Amun, as Amenhotep, and Thoth, as Thutmose, as their protectors, the family's homeland is the Delta rather than Upper Egypt. The scenes and text engraved on the northern and eastern the outer walls of the hypostyle hall in Karnak recounts the king's wars in Syria and Palestine, and Seti was regarded as one of the earliest kings to extensively document his military exploits on the walls of the temples. Following a report confirming the Bedouins of Palestine, Shazu in ancient Egyptian language, were planning a revolution to overthrow Egyptian control, the king went there and put an end to them in the first year of his reign. He then led his army to retake what Egypt had lost in Asia by marching with his army along the military road of Horus, which ran from the ancient Egyptian city of Kantara, Tijaru in ancient Egyptian language, to the city of Rafah, which was the first village in Palestine. To keep the Bedouins of the desert off the road, the king ordered the construction and re-establishment of guard posts along the route. It was through these that we learned about Seti-Is Migdal, a fortified fortress. In order to provide water, he also gave the order to dig wells like the well of Seti Merneptah. The king succeeded in driving out the rebels and securing the way. He proceeded to conquer Lebanon and even gave its prince orders to chop down enormous quantities cedar trees and transport them to Egypt. In addition, he launched another campaign against Kadesh on the Oront River, defeating his enemies there and leaving a stela that recorded and celebrated the triumph. In addition, texts and scenes depicting his battles with Libya and the Hittite kingdom can be seen on the walls of the hypostyle hall in Karnak. Subsequently, during his reign's 4th and 8th years, the king initiated 2 campaigns to destroy the rebels from Nubia. In order to prevent state employees from abusing holy property in Abydos, the king issued a proclamation. If there's anything to be inferred from this, it's the deviance that the king observed among state workers during this time. As a result, the king has made exploiters and corrupt officials subject to harsher punishments. For instance, we observe that chopping off the nose and ears of an employee who gains control of some illegal goods is a form of punishment, and that robbing a shepherd results in hitting him with 200 sticks, among other punishments. The king took part in the construction of Karnak's enormous hypostyle hall. In the sacred city of Abydos, he also constructed a temple that he named the Mansion of Millions of Years. This temple is undoubtedly one of the wonders of ancient Egyptian architecture. Its walls are adorned with delicate engravings and beautiful scenes that stand out for their exquisite details and color schemes. These scenes depict the various rituals the king performed in front of the gods and goddesses, and the temple is notable for having 7 shrines dedicated to the Egyptian gods and goddesses, one of which was designated for the king himself. After ruling for 14 years, Seti passed away and was buried in his well-known tomb in the King's Valley. This tomb is regarded as one of the most luxurious and spacious royal tombs because it is more than 100 meters long and is decorated with texts and scenes from religion and astronomy that were popular at the time. Regarding the temple dedicated to his memory, it was constructed on Kurna on Thebes' western mainland, and its remains can still be seen today. King Ramesses II, Usermot-Re, Setapan-Re, reigned from 1304 to 1237 BC. He is among the most well-known kings of the 19th dynasty. Following in his father Seti's footsteps, he governed Egypt for 66 years, building several temples and structures that immortalized his name for all eternity. He shared the rule with his father Seti, according to a text found on one of the walls of his father's temple in Abydos. Ramesses II disregarded this shared era and saw the start of his reign as coming from the moment he took the throne of Egypt by himself upon the death of his father. Following the passing away of the priest Nebnethruag, a member of a Thebes family, Ramesses II was forced to name a new high priest of the deity Amun at the start of his reign. The minister to King Seti was his son, Pa-Sater. Because of his smart, the king avoided giving this influential Theban family more power and influence in the state by not appointing a member to this important religious position. Instead, he appointed Nebwenenef, a priest from the city of Thanis, which is close to Abydos, as the high priest of the god Amun in Thebes. He was chosen for the Opet festival, which is held annually in the Luxor temple under the direction of the governing king, with the deity Amun's blessing. Nebwenenef left us an account of his life in his tomb, number 157, which is situated in the Dara Abu el-Naga cemetery on Thebes' western mainland. The capital was relocated by Ramesses II to a settlement north of the delta that he named Pur-Remes-Sug, which translates to the abode of Ramesses. Some scholars and experts believe that he founded it on the ruins of the Hyksos capital of Averroes, which was located 19 kilometers south of Tanis. Others, on the other hand, contend that the city of Tanis, which served as the capital of the 21st dynasty, was built on the ruins of the city of Pur-Remes-Sug. The city of Tanis is currently San al-Hajar, which is located in the Sharqiya northeast of the delta. The many archaeological artifacts discovered in the city, the majority of which date back to his rule, may serve as evidence for this. At the beginning of his reign, King Ramesses II engaged in combat with the Sardana, a group of sea peoples who later gave their name to Sardinia and it became their home. The second year of Ramesses II's reign is recorded on a stela discovered in Tanis, which states that they came in warships from the middle of the sea, and no one was able to repel them. As a result, Ramesses II was probably forced to fight them at one of the estuaries of the branches of the Nile, where he defeated and killed many of them, forcing the others to surrender. He therefore captured them as prisoners of war, and they later joined his army as soldiers. After 2 years, when he was certain of their loyalty, he added them to his private guard, and we see them with horned helmets, round shields, and enormous swords. We know that Ramesses II was forced to fight the Libyans when they started to advance on Egypt's western frontiers because of inscriptions engraved on a stela from his reign that was discovered close to El Alamein. Ramesses II built a fortification there to protect the western borders from the approaching Libyans. Ramesses II adopted a policy of defending his empire's borders in Asia after removal of Sardana from the delta in the north and the Libyans from the west. He began a military operation that reached Nahr al-Kalb, north of Beirut, in the 4th year of his rule. He was able to seize control of Nahr al-Kalb, which at that time was thought to be one of the most crucial routes for bringing different types of equipment into the country from the Mediterranean Sea, by taking over the coast of the Amurru kingdom. There, on a rock stela bearing his name, Ramesses II left us a record of this victory. Following this military operation, the prince of the Amurru kingdom, the kingdom over which Egypt and the Hittite kingdom disputed its sovereignty, called Bent Sina, joined Egypt and did not submit to the threats of the Hittite monarch Muwatalli. One of the factors that caused the Hittite king Muwatalli to assemble a sizable army in coalition with several other foreign countries in an effort to destroy Egyptian power in Asia was the kingdom of Amurru's entrance to the Egyptian side. After learning of this, Ramesses II led an army against the Hittite monarch and his allies in the 5th year of his reign. Ramesses II commanded that the famous Kadesh battle be shown in great detail on the walls and facades of the majority of the temples constructed under his rule. The events are depicted in words and images on the pylon of the Luxor temple, the walls of the Karnak and Abydos temples, the Ramesseum, a memorial temple located on Thebes' western mainland, and finally on the walls of his enormous rock-cut temple, also called the Great Temple of Abu Simbel. The details of this battle are also known to us because to a document written on one of the papyri. Having divided the 20,000 soldiers and leaders into 4 armies, Ramesses II gave each army a name derived from the names of the principal Egyptian gods, Amun, Re, Ta, and Seth. The army marched to the Oront River valley from Lebanon. 2 Bedouin spies who were dispatched by the Hittite king Muwatalli to monitor the movements of the Egyptian army were seized by the Egyptian soldiers there. They were able to fool the Egyptian military command with fabricated confessions that they had agreed upon with the Hittite monarch, suggesting that they had received training in such tactics. Following the heavy beating, they acknowledged that the Hittite monarch had retreated to Aleppo with his army upon learning of the Egyptian soldiers' march. On the other hand, the Egyptian armies were expecting a trap to destroy King Ramesses II and his army, while the Hittite monarch and his 2,500 war chariots, each carrying 3 soldiers, were concealed behind the city of Kadesh. Upon hearing the 2 spies' confessions, Ramesses II did not follow protocol and had his intelligence officers confirm what they said. Instead, he charged ahead of Amun's army in an attempt to catch up the opposing armies before they could catch up with him. The Hittite king and his soldiers were hidden behind the hills on the northeastern side, allowing them to detour until they reached the south, but he was unaware of this when he crossed the Oront River and set up camp with his personal guard and the army of Amun northwest of Kadesh. They attacked and scattered the second army, the army of Re, as soon as it started to cross the Oront River. The disintegration of the forces of Re and Amun was greatly aided by this unexpected attack, and Ramesses II was taken aback when his armies disbanded and just his personal guard remained with him, especially considering that the Third Army of Ta and the Fourth Army of Seth were distant from him. When he found himself all alone, he prayed to the deity Amun and was able, with his courage and with the help of those around him, managed to survive. His special guards were able to assemble the remnants of his dispersed army, create a gap between the Hittite enemy's soldiers, and rescue the majority and most of his army. Especially since at the same moment a military force of young people arrived and joined him, the conflict shifted and turned in his favor. This could be because the Hittite warriors from the enemy were busy looting the Egyptian camps. Regardless, the bravery of the Egyptian king allowed him to protect his army from certain death, ruining the Hittite foe's trick and strategy. The Hittite monarch then wrote to Ramesses II, requesting pardon and to grant his subjects the breeze of life, according to the Egyptian records. After consulting his officers, Ramesses II decided to accept the Hittite enemy's submission. He left and went back to Egypt without adding the fortified city of Kadesh to his empire. From the perspective of the Egyptian texts, this is the case. The Hittite perspective is preserved on clay tablets discovered in Boghazköy in Anatolia. It is written in cuneiform writing. It relates the Egyptian defeat and the Hittite king's soldiers pursuing the Egyptian army's rear till Damascus. Given that some historians favor the Hittite story while others incline toward the Egyptian version, historians may find themselves torn between the two stories. Regarding the events of the military conflicts they recount in their writings, it is normal for the Hittite and Egyptian kings to preserve their reputation, dignity, prestige, honor, and for themselves. One of the things that drove Ramesses II to try again to rebuild the empire in Asia was the Battle of Kadesh. In the 8th year of his reign, he reorganized his army and launched a military expedition into Syria and Palestine with the goal of putting down the uprisings there and bringing stability back to the country. Egyptian and Hittite conflict continued until both parties came to the conclusion that peace would benefit them more. As a result, they came to an agreement known as Good Security and Brotherhood, to which the gods of Hittite and Egypt attested. The Egyptian texts written in hieroglyphic script on one of the Karnak complex's walls and the cuneiform texts on 2 clay tablets discovered in Boghazköy provide us with the details of this pact. The creation of an offensive-defensive alliance between King Ramesses II of Egypt and King Hattusili III of the Hittites was perhaps the treaty's most significant conclusion. It also covered how refugees from one country to the next should be treated when they return home as citizens rather than as criminals. Following that, the kings of the two countries started writing to each other friendly letters. In this communication, Queen Pudakeba, the wife of Hittite King Hattusili III, and Queen Nefertari, the wife of King Ramesses II, also took part. In addition, Hattusili III paid Egypt a friendly visit. It appears that Ramesses II's wish for a diplomatic marriage to Hattusili II's daughter, which happened in the 34th year of his reign, was one of the driving forces behind this correspondence. The king commanded that this joyous occasion be commemorated on several stelae and in multiple locations. Records of this marriage can be found on the walls of the Karnak and Abu Simbel temples. The texts state that the Hittite king's daughter had a beautiful face that made her seem like a goddess. Her beauty won the king's undying love, and he bestowed upon her the Egyptian name Mahor-Neferu, which some have interpreted as Mahor-Neferu. As a result, the two kings united into one heart, like brothers, and the two countries briefly enjoyed peace. After 30 years of reign, Ramesses II celebrated the first Jubilee, have said, which he repeated in the 34th year. In the 37th year of his reign, he celebrated it for the 3rd time. He carried on celebrating it until the 11th Jubilee in the 61st year of his reign. Before he passed away, he might have celebrated the 13th Jubilee. The scenes of the Wadi el-Sebwa temple in Nubia also reveal that Ramesses II had more than 100 descendants. This could be because of the quantity of his legitimate or secondary, illegitimate. One of his most well-known sons was perhaps Prince Keemwas, who was interested in restoring antiques and was a priest to the deity Ta, and Prince Merinta, who succeeded him in the throne. With the temples, shrines, statues, and stelae he built across Egypt, Ramesses II achieved immortality. We refer to the front portion of the Luxor temple and how his continues of the Karnak complex's hypostyle hall. His temples are located in Nubia and Abydos. Perhaps the most well-known of them are the great temple of Abu Simbel, which was devoted to Amun, Re, Enta, as well as the deified King Ramesses II himself, and the smaller Abu Simbel temple is devoted to the worship of the goddess Hathor and the deified Queen Nefertari. This is in addition to the temple erected in his honor, which he named the Ramesseum and which is located on Thebes' western mainland. Not content with all of this, Ramesses II usurped numerous statues and immortalized his name on them. Although his mummy, which was discovered in the Deir el-Bahari cache and is currently on display in the Egyptian Museum, was not discovered within the tomb that Ramesses II excavated in the Valley of the Kings. Regarding his wife, Queen Nefertari, she was buried in her famous tomb located in western Thebes' Valley of the Queens. King Merinta, Bain Re, Mary Aman, reigned from 1236 to 1223 BC. Based on the list of King Ramesses II's children engraved on one of the walls of the Ramesseum temple, he is the 13th son of the king. It appears that during their father's rule, his 12 brothers who were born prior to him passed away. Following his father's passing away, he ascended to the throne and ruled Egypt. In accordance with the terms of the deal his father had made with the Hittites, the king started his reign by sending grain shipments to them when they were experiencing hunger and drought. The king tended to follow a strategy of protecting Egypt and its boundaries first, and the empire's periphery second. But throughout his reign, Egypt was challenged by a threat that originated in Libya, which was located in the west, rather than from the east or the south. Tribes from North Africa and the Western Sahara started migrating to Egypt's western borders with their women and children in search of food as a result of the country's terrible drought. Meryi, the chief of the Libya tribe, Libya, took charge of them. Along with his 12 wives, he brought his kids. This would suggest that they intended to settle in the Nile Valley. As a result, the king was forced to dispatch a military expedition to protect Egypt's western boundaries in the 5th year of his reign, having first built up a strong army of foot soldiers and chariots. He was able to kill 6,000 and capture 9,000 during the 6-hour combat. This was a serious defeat, both a penalty for them and a preventive to others who might act similarly. On one of the walls of the Karnak complex, Egyptian inscriptions from the time of his reign described the details of this battle. He gave the order to write on the back of a stone stela from King Amenhotep II's reign that Tehenu, Libya, had been devastated and that Israel has been ruined and its seed has been removed. The name Israel appears in ancient Egyptian texts for the first time here. After passing away, Merneptah was buried in the Valley of the Kings in his tomb. His mummy was discovered in Amenhotep II's tomb, which was later utilized as a mass burial to keep a collection of kings' mummies safe from robbers. Following the violent confusion that followed King Merneptah's death, a succession of kings assumed power in Egypt. Though their precise sequence is unknown, current views indicate that Amenes usurped power and ruled for a maximum of 5 years. In the Valley of the Kings, he was laid to rest in his tomb. Then Merneptah's son King Seti II came to power and ruled for 7 years. He left for us his tomb in the Valley of the Kings and a shrine in the first courtyard of the Karnak complex. During his reign, Tazard, his wife, was the main player in state affairs. Following his death, Siptah, most likely the son of King Seti II and his second wife, succeeded to the throne. It's plausible that Tazard co-ruled with him throughout the 7 years of his life. Years later, she had 2 years of absolute power. Like Hatshepsut before her, she assumed royal titles and named one of her men Bey, who was most likely of Syrian descent. In the Valley of the Kings, his tomb was cut next to hers. When she passed away around 1200 BC, the 19th dynasty comes to an end. The 20th dynasty. From 1200 to 1085 BC. King Ramesses III, User Mot Reed, Mary Amon. Reigned from 1198 to 1166. The transfer of power from the 19th to the 20th dynasties is unknown to us. We don't know what happened when Queen Tawzert passed away, but the records indicate that Setnakht established the 20th dynasty and seems to have been a high-ranking official at this time. Following him, he took the kingdom for himself and his family. He reigned for a maximum of 2 years before passing away. He took possession of the Tawzert tomb and used it as his eternal home and buried there. His son Ramesses III, often regarded as Egypt's final great king, succeeded him. He occupied the Egyptian throne at a time when Egypt desperately needed one of its powerful sons to defend the country against the invading forces. Using Ramesses II as his model, he started to imitate him in terms of his name, title, and the temples he built and the scenes on it. He named his children after him in honor of him. In the early years of his reign, Ramesses III defended Egypt from threats posed by migrations from the Sea Peoples and Libyans. However, in the 5th year of his reign, the king was forced to use his armies to drive out the Libyan migrants who had attempted to settle in Egypt during the reign of King Merneptah, whom he evilly vanquished. These Libyan peoples attempted to push farther into the delta and even destroyed several of its cities during Ramesses III's reign. 12,535 of them were killed and the king managed to stop their progress. At a temple dedicated to his memory in Medinet Habu, western Thebes, the king recorded the details of this battle in texts and scenes. In the 8th year of his reign, Ramesses III led his land and sea armies to defend Egypt against the Sea Peoples who came from the islands in the Aegean Sea and Asia Minor, and invaded the Hittite kingdom and destroyed it. Several peoples participated in these migrations. The two most significant groups were the Plist people, who were identified by a feather on their heads, and the Tjeker people, who were identified by their helmets bearing 2 horns apiece. As they advanced, they destroyed the kingdom of Amurru's shoreline and destroyed Egyptian authority in Syria. After that, they reached Palestine and from there, traveled by land and sea to Egypt. With their war carts pulled by horses and their women and children riding in bullock wagons behind, some of them chose the land route. Some chose the maritime path, boarding their vessels until they arrived at the Nile River's estuaries. Through his plans, the king to defeat them both on land and at sea, and the Egyptian army dispersed the opposing force and the Egyptian navy, at that time, was able to destroy enemy concentration, enabling the king to beat them both on land and at sea. The Egyptian inscriptions offered tremendous detail, both in text and scene, about the sea war depicted on one of the walls of the Medinet Habu temple, even if they only mentioned the land combat briefly, in passing. It's possible that these battle scenes are the first in ancient Egyptian history to depict maritime conflicts of this type. In this way, the king was able to spare Egypt from an impending threat that would have destroyed it. The Libyans led by Meshesher, who had arrived at the Canopic branch of the Nile with their women and children, were to be destroyed. Thus the king was forced to advance ahead of his army in the 11th year of his reign. He killed 2,175 of them and captured 2,052 prisoners. He also seized all of their livestock. The 11th year of Ramesses III's reign marked the end of his wars, and the findings of the excavations, which took place in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina on Thebes' western mainland, paint a clear picture of the social life of the workers, who were the foundation for the majority of the temples and tombs. The area is home to a collection of sculptors, stonemasons, painters, artisans, craftsmen, artists, and workers in general who created, built, and ornamented the kings' and nobles' tombs in the cemetery beginning in the New Kingdom and especially during the 19th and 20th dynasties. We know this because of the numerous ostraca that have been discovered, the letters that have been written about them, the images of their lives, the complaints they have expressed, and even the strikes they conducted when their monthly salary were not paid on time and food supplies they lived on became rare. Maybe much more hazardous than this is the conspiracy described in multiple papyri, which involved some palace women working under Queen Titi or Titi's supervision, to depose the king and install her son, Pentuer, on the throne of Egypt. When the king learned of this news, he gave the order to punish Queen Titi, or Titi, and every man and woman that joined her in the palace, both male and female. During his 31-year reign, Ramesses III built a number of buildings, the most significant of which was probably the small temple he erected for the god Amun-Re, which is located south of the Karnak complex's first courtyard and is regarded as the prototype for the god's temples in the New Kingdom. In addition to the well-known temple in Medinet Habu dedicated to his memory, we also know that in his 5th year the king dispatched 300 men to cut and carry the stones required for this temple, according to inscriptions discovered on sandstone quarries in the Mount Silsila region, north of Kom-Ombo. The king died in the 31st year of his reign, having most likely celebrated the first jubilee, Heb said. In the Valley of the Kings, he was laid to rest in his tomb. Ramesses III's successors. 8 kings succeeded King Ramesses III. From the 4th to the 11th, everyone adopted the name Ramesses. While their reigns varied, they were similar in their weakness and submission to the god Amun's priesthood. They chose to live in the delta as a result in order to escape the influence of these priests in Thebes. They ruled for 8 decades. It is observed that during the final years of Ramesses III's reign, when things started to get worse, there were obvious signs of the royal authorities' weakness, the economy collapsing, and the growing power of the god Amun's priests. During his 6-year reign, Ramesses IV usurped the throne and attempted to improve the country's situation while establishing religious and other structures. In the 3rd year of his reign, according to the inscriptions at the Wadi Hammamat quarry, he dispatched a mission of 8,368 men to bring the stones required for these architectural marvels. He was laid to rest in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings because he did not live long enough to see it through to completion. The fact that this royal tomb's architectural blueprint was discovered on a papyrus that is currently on display at the Louvre Museum in France and that the technical and structural conventions were expressed in hieratic script may be the reason for the tomb's reputation. After him came Ramses V, who ruled for a short time 4 years. The Wilbur Papyrus tells us that a thorough survey of Egypt's agricultural areas was conducted in the 4th year of his reign, beginning in central Egypt and extending from Fayum to Minya. According to the papyrus, the majority of these areas were still possessed by the gods' temples, particularly Thebes' Temple of Amun. Additionally, it made the agricultural tax structures and social structure of this era of ancient Egypt's history more understandable. Additionally, we know that Rames Nakht, the first priest of Amun during the reign of Ramesses IV, VI, and his father was in charge of tax collection business throughout Egypt. In the Valley of the Kings, the king dug his tomb. Following him was Ramses VI, who ruled for 7 years. He expanded upon and appropriated the tomb of Ramesses V, his predecessor. Its scenes and inscriptions, which offer us a picture of the beliefs of this age on life in the netherworld with its gods, demons, and hell, may be what sets it apart. The tomb is located in the Valley of the Kings, next to Tutankhamun's tomb. We're not sure how the king managed to finish it, given its enormous size, and to have it sketched, engraved, and colored until it looked so amazing and distinctive in style. All of this during the 7 years of his rule, despite Egypt's poor economic circumstances. After him came Ramesses VII, another weak king who ruled for 2 years. After then, Ramesses VIII came to power. He ruled for 6 years, although his tomb has never been located in the Valley of the Kings. Following that, Ramesses IX ascended to the Egyptian throne and ruled for about 20 years. Maybe the papyri that describe the king's tomb robbing that took place during his reign are the reason for his fame. The 16th year of his reign saw the height of administrative corruption, and Theban gangs started robbing tombs of their valuables, including gold and silver. They even tampered with the tombs of notable Egyptian kings including Ramesses II, Seti I, and Amenhotep III. People started to lose trust in their kings, gods, and other authorities. According to one of these papyri, Pasaer, the mayor of the city of the living and in charge of the eastern bank of Thebes, reported to the minister King Wazet, who was representing the king, about the robberies taking place in the city of the dead, on the western bank of Thebes, under his watchful eye, and he saw of its mayor, Pa'ara. Therefore, the minister gave the order to organize a committee in order to confirm the veracity of the report's findings. The Abbot Papyrus, which has been kept for us over time so that we can understand the details of these robberies and what was done about them, is arguably the most significant of the papyri that this committee recorded the conclusions it made. The robbers acknowledged that they had broken the sanctity of the mummies of all the Egyptian kings, both significant and minor. As a result, the king's priests of the 21st dynasty were forced to covertly relocate some of the mummies of the New Kingdom kings to multiple hiding places in order to guard them against the robbers' manipulation. After moving 13 mummies to Amenhotep II's tomb, they selected an incomplete tomb in Deir el-Bahari and filled it with 40 more mummies, creating what is known as the Deir el-Bahari cache. The king's mummies stayed hidden until 1881, when Emil Brugge discovered the mummies of Deir el-Bahari, and 1898, when Victor Loret discovered the mummies concealed in Amenhotep II's tomb. Now, all of the mummies may be found in the Mummies Hall of the Egyptian Museum. We already knew how the country was crushed by the economic crisis at the conclusion of Ramesses III's reign, and how it got worse under the Ramessides' reign until the workers started to erupt under the hardships of living, while grain prices grew fivefold. It was around this time that Ramses X ruled over Egypt. During his 8-year reign, there was widespread hunger, which led to the workers' exhaustion and eventual cessation of activity. The next stage involved crossing the Nile to complain to the high priest of Amun, who dismissed the claims for lack of authority. Additionally, he explained that he was unable to provide the temple's grains to keep them from starving to death. However, because they remained in their positions until the following morning, the chief priest was forced to dispatch a senior employee along with the deputy director of the royal barn, instructing him to go to the minister's grains and give the men of the cemetery their supplies of them. The final king of the 20th dynasty was King Ramses XI. During the 28 years of his reign, the priest Amenhotep, who became the high priest of Amun following the death of his father, the priest Ramesnakht, grew in power, influence, and boldness. The priest Amenhotep attempted to stage a coup when the country's wealth had come into his hands, his power had grown, and he had more supporters. However, the revolution was thwarted at the moment with the assistance of Painasi, the viceroy of Kush. Following Amenhotep's removal from power, Herihor became Amun's high priest. This occurred during the 19th year of the king's reign. Presumably, Herihor enlisted in the army at an early age and rose through the ranks to become commander of the armies of Upper and Lower Egypt, then viceroy of the king in Kush. With the blessing of the gods Amun and Khonsu for their nomination, he pursued his ambition and rose to the rank of minister before realizing his dream and becoming the high priest of Amun at Thebes. As seen by the scenes of the temple of Khonsu at the Karnak complex, Herihor dared to permit himself to be portrayed as the king's size and rank. Instead, we see him wearing the crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt and viewing himself as a king, at least in Thebes, where he also commanded the addition of royal titles and his name be placed inside the royal cartouche. He even called his reign the Renaissance Age and started to document events in accordance with this historical period. The king was content with the situation as it was, and satisfied with the fait accompli. With so, the 20th dynasty comes to an end, along with the New Kingdom and Egyptian Empire eras.